So there seems to be a great debate of whether athletes should spend time on the theoretical aspects of strength and conditioning, or if they should just spend all of their time on their training and the performance itself and leave the theoretical training to the coaches. They might argue that athletes, for example, they already have a busy schedule due to their own sport and they don't have to burden themselves with a bunch of glycolysis and periodization, reps and sets and all of that. Leave that to the coaches. And I believe there is a huge error in this approach, and I do not advocate it at all. It does more harm than good for several reasons. Number one, the athlete will not be able to understand the deeper context or the purpose of the exercise, how it will aid the athlete in terms of sports performance. The coach needs to educate the athlete of why the exercise is being performed, how it will help in the development. If you just perform an exercise like this without knowing the purpose, this is like learning how to write without understanding grammars. And consequently, based on the first point, this will lead to a very mechanical approach because you don't know the purpose of what you're doing, and this will likely affect your enthusiasm. Because when an athlete is unsure of the purpose behind an exercise or a technique, anything that they're doing in the training, if they blindly follow something without knowing where it will lead to, this is like you're acting like a robot. Like, it will be the same feeling as doing homework back in school on a subject you didn't even care about. So enthusiasm is important, and you raise enthusiasm by making sure the athlete know what this exercise will lead to by the help of theoretical training. And number three is that you will prolong the time that is required for you to learn a certain skill because you lack this mental roadmap that comes from theoretical training. If you don't know the theory behind a training intervention, you are just following a dark road without knowing where it leads to. If you have your theoretical base, your mental roadmap, this road, it will become clear and you will know where you are going. And lastly, why would I as a coach, or anyone for that matter, deliberately withhold education that could help someone with a certain thing? There is no rationality in doing that. Let's say I'm working with a wrestler and I am instructing them on how to perform a back squat. Why would I not explain to them the deeper context of why we are doing the back squat in this case? Why we are doing 5 reps, for instance, instead of 10? Why we need to brace the core or keep the back straight? Show them an anatomical model, for example, of a spine that gets bent and what this will lead to. This is theoretical training. Why would I withhold that? With that being said, it is true, of course, that the roles need to be clear between an athlete and a coach. The top priority of a trainer is the theoretical knowledge, while the top priority of an athlete is the execution, the training itself. Now, this doesn't mean that one excludes the other. It is always beneficial for a coach to have felt the movement of the sport, for instance, that him or her is coaching. And it is also beneficial for an athlete to have a theoretical basis, of course, because then you understand the context of everything you're doing once again. But it is a matter of priorities. Simply put, the athlete will suffer physically and mentally in the training facility, while the coach will suffer physically and mentally diving deep into the books and all of the literature. They both suffer. It's just a matter of priorities. In essence, it's not only about instructing as a coach, it is also about educating. Now let's go through some key points that the coach needs to emphasize with the athletes when it comes to theoretical training. So suppose I'm showing an athlete of how to perform the back squat. I might tell them things like keep a good core tension, tighten the glutes, keep a neutral back and all of that, the obvious stuff. But what happens if I also show them like a quick anatomical model of a spine, how the back is built and what actually happens anatomically if this back is bent with compressive and shear force throughout the movement, especially when we have a heavy weight behind our back? How a disc is bent if all of those compressions get combined with a sliding force. Then this will instill a much more powerful effect in the athlete, and they will know the consequences behind them because they actually have this mental picture of what will happen. Before they didn't have that. They were just listening to some instructions that was blunt. So this will work a lot better than just following a blunt order like keep your back straight. The question of why should pass through their head. Why? They shouldn't be thinking, okay, I'm just doing this because my coach said so. They should be doing it because of the reasoning behind it, like the scientific reasoning. And that is the job of the coach, to show all of this evidence, the scientific reason behind it, and now that they know the dangers and the consequences of not following it, they will take it more seriously. Very often the coach will construct a plan for the athlete. Maybe that plan is to develop explosive power development or force production. Maybe they are preparing for a competition in the near future, in 1 month, in half a year, 1 year, whatever. It might even be a combination of different things. Then this will all be planned and put together with something called periodization, which is fancy vocabulary for planning, in other words. And this basically means that we take that ultimate goal and we divide it into all of those pieces that will lead to us achieving that goal, and we attack those pieces one by one in a periodized fashion, of course. So the coach therefore should educate the purpose behind each one of those training blocks, what they will lead to and how they relate to the long-term goal. It's also the job of the coach to explain the physiological adaptations that happen after a training intervention. For instance, what happens inside of the body when we do strength training compared to endurance training? What is the difference between strength training and power training? What is aerobic training and anaerobic training? What's the difference if oxygen is available when you do a high effort activity versus if it's not? What is lactate accumulation? If an athlete does an intensive interval for 1 minute straight with very high effort versus a 60-minute steady state cardio workout, what is the difference and the physiological responses that happen in the body? The athlete needs to be aware of what happens after a training intervention, and this is the job of the coach to explain this, to explain all of the different energy systems of the body that get activated depending on the task, depending on the effort and the exercise. This is very important because once again, then the athlete will be following a procedure blindly without knowing what happens and what it will lead to. There is a constant dilemma in being an elite athlete. You want to challenge yourself to your limits while at the same time preventing injuries, and this can be a very hard task. The line between those borders can be very thin, and it is a very hard task to control an athlete to not push him or herself beyond what was initially planned for that day, for example, and therefore prevent injuries and burnout. Not only that, but an athlete has to be educated on what actually causes an injury. For instance, if we perform a back squat, it is not enough for me to just say, keep your back straight once again. It is not enough. I will explain why the back needs to be kept straight anatomically. I will show them once again an anatomical model of the spine, how it is constructed and what happens if the back is bent while carrying a massive weight. Or what happens if the ligaments of the knees, when they are twisted excessively and when weights are also come into the picture that aid in this twisting motion. Once again, this lesson will instill better in them and they will think twice about it the next time compared to me just saying keep your back straight. In simple terms, an athlete must be aware of not only how to increase performance but also mitigate the chances of injury. I will also educate them on warning signals and about what to do acutely when an injury comes into the picture and the mindset you need to adopt during an injury. And yes, there is a certain mindset you need when you're injured. You have to forget everything about your previous all-out mindset that you did when your body was in a healthy condition. Your body is now in recovery mode and the training you will do is night and day compared to what you did previously. You cannot follow your old achievements anymore. Otherwise, you will keep reopening this injury and you will be stuck in an endless loop of getting injured again and re-injured and all of that, and it's not worth it. I can tell you that by experience. It is not uncommon for me to see a very dedicated athlete continue pushing him or herself in the middle of an exercise when one of those clear warning signals have appeared. And this is once again that championship mindset that is working. And most of the times they will most likely regret it when they are faced with an injury, and this is a very sad fact. Now, this is a human flaw that we all possess. I have made this mistake over and over once again. So the key will be to recognize what constitutes as a warning signal and have this mental maturity, this resilience to stop right then and there. You might think that you are doing yourself a favor by keep pushing this exercise, keep going despite those warning signals, that you cannot afford to just lose one training session or whatnot. But this is a curse in disguise, because if you get injured, you may be away for over a year. You never know. That's 365 training sessions versus one that you lost. You do the math. And of course, we also have the mental aspects of training, the emotional and all of the psychological aspects. And they are easily neglected. They are not stressed often enough in different training facilities. I have seen this with my own eyes, but they are a very important one. Competing at an elite level is, for most athletes, it is nothing that is free of emotional stress. The highs are very high and the lows are very low, and I would be lying if I said that elite level competition is always synonymous with good health. I will arm all of my athletes with all of the mental tools that I can possibly come up with to help them cope psychologically and emotionally with all of the demands of elite level competition. And I will help them build a healthy amount of confidence. This is a gradual process. Mental toughness, confidence, psychology, mindfulness, all of this is nature and nurture, but we only have control over one of them. The evidence is overwhelming. Visualization, affirmations, meditations, there are many alternatives. They all work. Once again, the science backs it up. But it's not only about that. We have to implement it, and that is the tough part. And which method suits best for one athlete is also an important aspect. So it's not just about telling them about the methods, but I have to be on their ass so that they can implement those things, and finally it will stick with them and they can do it automatically. It might be a safe feeling knowing that a coach will look out for you at least until you have developed this autonomy, and that is what I'm after. I want them to start making decisions by themselves ultimately. I want them to do those routines to stick with them so they don't need me anymore. That is the ultimate goal. Every champion, they have a team. Every champion has a team behind him or her. This is not a lonely business. I don't care how many quotes you read on the internet that says the road to success is lonely or go at it alone. Everyone are snakes and fakes, whatever, sure. You might have to make the decision individually, but the rise to the top of improving, that is done collectively with a team. And last but not least, diet. And it's easy to think that this is an obvious point, but more often than not, it is not. And this concept of healthy diet, it has become a meme at this point. Like, I think it's very misused. And by diet, I'm not talking about like this bowl of salad and fruits every single meal. I'm not advocating that you approach a ideology of diet like someone would approach a sect. I cannot give you a solution that works best for everyone equally, because here genetics matter, and this is something that requires a lot of experimenting. Like, everyone responds differently for certain foods. You can't say milk is bad for everyone. You can't say starch is bad for everyone or whatever. You can't say nuts is bad for everyone, because everyone responds differently to a certain thing. But what I can do is to teach you the fundamentals of it. You can learn the fundamentals of diet. And you learn the fundamentals, for example, by studying the energy systems, the requirements of a certain activity in your sport. What carbohydrate serves as a fuel for high-intensive activities? Why is protein important when it comes to muscle building, the protein synthesis, for example? What are the different kinds of carbohydrates? What is the difference between this slow starchy carbohydrate and this fast sugary like carbohydrate that you would get from fruits or sweets or candy or something like that? You need to distinguish between all of those like components of the different nutritions and what purpose they serve. You need to have a base of quality carbs in your diet, especially before those intense training sessions, and you need to choose the correct carbs for the activity. Now, once again, this is a pretty sensitive topic because it might involve people's emotional attachments, to various diets and ideologies, whether that is low fat, high carbs, whatever you want. And if you're not an athlete participating in intense activities, for instance, you can probably get away with being a fruitarian, following a keto-based diet, a carnivore diet, whatever you want, however you wish. But as an athlete who participates in predominantly anaerobic activity, those high-effort, intensive activities, my studies show me that carbohydrates, for instance, are an important aspect of this kind of training and it cannot be neglected. And of course we want to have as much lean body mass as possible to get the most benefit out of our weight, especially if we compete in a sport that is set in a specific weight class, for example. They have a weight limit. Because think about it, if you have two athletes that weigh the same, but one has less body fat than the other, up to the healthy limit that is, then this athlete will have a higher potential for athleticism. And that is why protein in the diet is an important aspect as well, because protein is the building blocks of muscle mass. It contributes to the protein synthesis once again. And one athlete might not be aware of this knowledge, like how much protein they must be eating every day for an optimal effect of this protein synthesis and all of that, and I have to educate them on this stuff. Oftentimes when it comes to diet, there's nothing fancy about this, there's no secrets here, but once again, it's most likely not the knowledge that has been missing all along when I'm working with my athletes, but the implementation of this knowledge, spending time in the kitchen, actually making something good and taking your diet seriously. I will make them aware of how neglecting this area will affect all of their work they have put in and how it prolongs the time for us to reach our goals, you know. And this will instill in them a much more powerful effect, I believe, than just telling them eat quality carbs or eat more protein or whatever. I will tell them like what will happen if they don't do it. And of course I will be on their ass until it is implemented and it happens automatically.